I wonder if they mean it over at WWE Treasures. Let me grab my notes here. This past week on A&E, after the biography episode, was the Treasures Most Wanted Treasures episode with Sergeant Slaughter. And I thought they were going to have Sheik too. And they said, well, Sheik's, not able to get around as much anymore, but they could have Skyped him. I just wanted to hear a Sheik rant, right? But anyway, Sergeant Slaughter was finding items across the world related to his famous epic feud with the Iron Sheik. And there was some cool stuff on here, and a couple of friends, and I will shout them out as we get there. But think about this. Brian Last, wrestling historian, during the Bob Backlund era that he was the babyface champion of the WWF, during that 5 years, Vince also had, starting with Vince Sr., also had both of the hottest babyfaces in the business at the time in Sergeant Slaughter and Jimmy Snuka during the time that Backlund was champion.
No. You're a little off. Snuka turned babyface the end of 82, but Backlund lost the title.
Okay,
and then after that,
Slaughter
is
turned.
when Slaughter finally turned.
I thought I had a fucking loophole there, but still, when was there another time in wrestling when the most popular babyface, the biggest box office attraction of a babyface in the wrestling business, was not the champion of any company?
Well, but 84, I mean, even a bigger point to what you're making. Look at 1984, the first year that most people consider the national expansion, although 1983 is really when it kicks off, although some would say 82. But 1984, if you look at what was going on in 1984, Hulk Hogan was on the road. He had no set feud. So it'd really just be Hulk Hogan against a big heel that people would know in your town. He's the attraction. And then the two real touring feuds, Piper and Snuka had to go away for a little while. So there were twists and turns in that feud.
Had to go away for a little while.
And Slaughter and the Sheik. And if you talk to anyone who was there in 84, a lot of people will say Slaughter was just as popular as Hogan in 84.
Oh, yeah. See, that's what we were hearing in the other territories. Is first it was Snuka, and everybody was apeshit over Snuka, and then it was Slaughter. Hogan eventually, transposed. Hogan was pushed in the spot from the very start, and he eventually got there and was became more popular than Slaughter had been. But at the time that Slaughter first switched babyface, which is why the whole G.I. Joe thing came up and why that Slaughter ended up leaving, because he didn't want, Vince to be in control of everything he did when he had all those opportunities. I mean, still how long was the G.I. Joe run? Was years. And still to this day.
1990.
Yeah, still till this day, I was at a show with him several years ago. He's signing those action figures. He's got real G.I. Joe fucking action figures. None of the other G.I. Joes can autograph their own action figures because they don't exist.
Well, William the Refrigerator Perry had his own action figure.
For G.I. Joe?
For G.I. Joe.
What the
G.I. Joe had several mail-in offers. It was Sergeant Slaughter. There was the William Refrigerator Perry. There was the Super Trooper. There were a few other ones.
What does William Refrigerator Perry have to do with G.I. Joe?
He was very big in the 80s. And
you could have put a period after big.
And he was also very big in size. So popular in the 80s. We could make a football into some sort of weapon with spikes in it. Let's make him a G.I. Joe. They were going to do Rocky Balboa too, but that fell apart.
Yo, Adrian.
But the Slaughter figures...
Call Stephen P. New, copyright infringement.
There are several, at least 4 or 5 from the original run, Sergeant Slaughter G.I. Joe figures, and he was a big player in their movie and on their show, and there's even like a fake, I hate to say fake, but it's not one of the WWE, WWF LJNs, but Hasbro made a Sergeant Slaughter that's a little bit bigger, but the same as those early WWF figures, so a little bit bigger than Hogan and a little bit bigger than the rest, but he could fit in with those and beat them up.
I like the footage they showed. Remember the confrontation in the aisleway between Slaughter and Sheik was a big deal at the time. And that was also still at a time period where the WWF television barely ever did any angles, much less what we see today, one every segment.
Did they ever mention that he was a heel before the Iron Sheik feud?
Well, you know what? That's one of those things that I knew and I assumed. And if they did spell it out, I don't know, but they may not have spelled it out. But yeah, he was, obviously that was back when people could actually turn from heel to babyface or babyface to heel, and it was shocking. So he had been a heel, but he wasn't going to put up with that. I mean, this was not revolutionary booking. To be honest, I'm not saying it wasn't a huge thing. I just said it was a huge thing, and it got over like crazy, and it drew, but it wasn't a earth-shaking moment of booking to have a guy who had a military background, even if he was a heel, be offended by the machinations and gesticulations and statements of a foreign, American, anti-American menace.
And Ayatollah Blassie.
I mean, they did the same thing with Dutch Mantell when Dutch was a heel in Memphis. And there was Tojo Yamamoto managing Atsushi Onita, Mr. Onita, and Masafuchi in 1981 in Memphis. And I can't remember who they got on, and they fucking beat shit out of him and busted him open, the baby face, and beat him with the Japanese flag that they were waving, whatever. And out comes Dutch, who's been a heel, slides in, makes a hell of a comeback, and cuts the promo and says, I don't care what's gone on in the past. I'm not going to see that take place when I laid in that rat-infested jungle in Vietnam for 11 months and 27 days to defend this country and blah, blah, blah. And he just transferred Vietnam to Japan. And now Dutch is a babyface, and the people are going fucking crazy. Yes, and also everybody in the territory remembered how long Dutch laid in that rat-infested jungle. He didn't say a year. He said 11 months and 27 days. And that was 40 years ago, and I can still remember it. But anyway, it was a big fucking deal. Slaughter turns babyface. The confrontation with the Iron Sheik. This was still at a point in time where they were having grudge wrestling matches and could get juice willy-nilly with abandon. And Sheik loved, because the Sheik at that point in time was borrowing a lot more from the original Sheik than Ali Vaziri did. When he was a rookie. And I remember one night he worked with Ron Bass in the Louisville Gardens, and he pulled out a cake spreading knife. I don't know what you call it, but you know those things that you spread icing on cakes with?
Yeah.
He pulled that out. He'd gotten it from the concession stand, I guess, or something, and pulled it out of his boot. And thing is, it's not sharp, but it looked like a butcher knife from second row ringside and back. And he's sawing on fucking Ron Bass's head, and Bass has got the juice, and the people are starting to climb over the fucking seats from ringside. Stop him, he's got a fucking butcher knife. Sheik loved that shit. And anyway, the highlights showed how good Sarge was. What a fucking worker. What a big man worker, but just an athletic worker, and the bumps that he could take, and the body language that he had, especially when they showed the clip. But I was there when he came back and had the match on Raw, I guess it was, with Helmsley, and they showed some footage of that. And yes, Helmsley looked great. He had a wonderful physique, and he was a good worker even then, but you could tell he was going to school with Sergeant Slaughter, with the body language and the way Sarge sold and etc. I was laughing when the host said Ben Brown, the archivist, said they didn't have much Sergeant Slaughter or Iron Sheik memorabilia. If you're listening, at least as of 1999, if you go to the second level of the parking garage at Titan Tower, over on the far corner on the right-hand side is Sergeant Slaughter's camouflage limousine that had been parked there at that point for 15 years. All four tires are flat. But it's there if you want it. I'm back because I bet nobody's ever moved it. So I love the old pictures of it. a lot of people don't realize that the Iron Sheik didn't always look like that. And when they showed the pictures of Ali Vaziri and he had the fucking abs and the whole 9 yards and the Iranian army and etc., that had to be a shock for some people.
It had to be a shock for some of those guys who trained in Vern's barn who don't see Ali Vaziri for years and then run into him in 79 or so, and he's all of a sudden the Iron Sheik or a Hussein Arab. Totally different guy. And of course, in terms of
not just the great Hussein,
not just look, but in terms of outside the ring behavior, from all stories, a completely different guy than what he was in 1972 in Minnesota.
I met the Iron Sheik in 1982, but I had seen Ali Vaziri wrestle on TV. He did jobs, worked underneath for Nick in 1974. Ali Vaziri, he was announced at 212 pounds. He had abs and hair, and he was rail thin, but he had the shooter outfit on.
How much did he really weigh, do you think?
Probably around that.
Okay.
Maybe. You know, I mean, it's not like they were going to fucking understate him. Nobody understated anything in those days. I mean, Mike Jackson was introduced at 188 pounds.
I was wondering if they built it up to more than what it was because he was pretty trim in his early days. That's what I was thinking.
No, but he was thin, but at the same time, he was all muscle. But then, like you said, by 1979, he's shaved bald. He's got the handlebar mustache and the gimmick and the big belly. And yes, America somewhat corrupted him. I guess we're not talking out of school that Sheik has had different habits. But anyway, they were looking for the boots and the Persian clubs. And the Persian clubs were the thing that Sheik used to obviously do every time he'd come to a territory, because part of it is the weight. I mean, Sheik had great upper body strength, and part of it is the weight of those clubs because they are heavy, but part of it also is the technique, which you could see because even though the AJ, the host, was, he was big enough he could bring them up and down, but he couldn't swing them in the rotating fashion like Sheik did. And Backlund, because that's an old-fashioned gym training method, and Backlund, is into any kind of physical fitness training. He's nuts, right? So he could do it pretty good. But in any territory, you'd have the babyface come out, and the one babyface you probably could do it would start, and then the Sheik would attack him, and blah blah blah. But Backlund did him in '83. But Sheik was still doing the fucking thing in '89, and the makeshift clubs. Did you see?
He was doing it in '99. I mean, he didn't stop doing it.
Well, no, but I mean, Sheik was doing it in doing the club deal when he came back to WCW in '89. Backlund had done the big run in '83. But what I'm saying is, Backlund had the clubs when they went to Backlund's house in Connecticut, and he said that the Sheik gifted them to him. Well, the Sheik had the gimmick clubs in '89, and Backlund had done them in '83. So I'm sure that the Sheik gave him one set of those clubs, but he had two sets. He had a real set, and he had a gimmick set.
He may have had more than that, because here's the thing. In that video, the montage video to talk about his world-famous clubs, they showed at least 4 different clubs. You could tell what they are, the color, the tape, everything. They showed various, at least 4. It was maybe more than that. They just showed all those different ones. Backlund had 2. They both look like they could have been 2 possibly of the 4 there.
Well, no,
but there were others.
That's the thing, because the ones he wouldn't get rid of were the real wooden clubs. The other ones were gimmick, handmade. You could see they were taped up and they had weights in them, but they had a fucking mop handle on them or what. Because Sheik sometimes, if he'd go to a territory, he wouldn't have the real clubs. He'd just make some, right? It's all these are the Persian clubs. But so I just found it coincidental that Bob had 2 sets of clubs that the Sheik gave him, and he was willing to part with the gimmick clubs, but not the real clubs. Blah, blah, blah.
By the way, he's completely nuts.
He is. But I love him. He's nuts. He's a lovable nuts. And, he's always fun in some respect to be around. But
John Arezzi,
what shape he's in.
John Arezzi, a few years ago, made an appearance at a convention. I think Tommy Fierro ran. And Bob Backlund was going to be there, and an attraction for the convention was John was going to interview Bob Backlund. This is just a couple of years ago. I asked John after it. I said, how did it go? He goes, it went well. I said, well, how did it go with Backlund? Because he could be odd at times. He said, it went well. He did the interview on his head, and then he left. he stood upside down the whole interview and then just walked out of the room without saying goodbye.
And that was a shoot, too. I've seen him. He would not sign autographs for kids unless they could recite all the presidents in order. And so I don't have any Bob Backlund autographs either. But then they went to Long Island, and we got to see my old friend John Pantazzi. Do you know that John Pantazzi once sent me $100,000 in cash?
Really?
No, really. I'm not doing a bit here. I'm not lying. John Pantazzi sent me $100,000 in cash, and I still have it. The problem is, John works, or at least he worked, I don't know if he's still there, at the Federal Reserve, and it was the money that they take in, and they fucking shred it all, and it was compacted into a brick and wrapped into a souvenir fucking item.
That's pretty cool, though.
But it was still $100,000 in cash, so I got that going for me. So I love seeing, and okay, what a collection. Now, we've talked about all these guys. They go into these collections, and it's all ring-worn stuff from guys 20 years ago or action figures or whatever. Pantazzi's got some cool shit there. I saw a bunch of stuff I was just oohing and ahhing over.
Not far from where I grew up either, in Long Island. That's I grew up in Long Beach on the South Shore. That's, I don't know, about 20, 25 minutes from there. So right close by.
Well, and there's a word to the wise, John Pantazzi, if you're listening. Now that Brian Last knows approximately where you are, get double locks on your doors and windows to keep your collection safe. But he's got a lot of vintage stuff, but he has, stuff from this era that they're talking. I'm talking vintage 40s, 50s stuff, but this era, Sargent and Slaughter. And of course, he has an Iron Sheik boot. And they want the Iron Sheik boot camp match boot. So what was it? $5,100 for one boot. That's not bad. But then they find out Pantazzi sold him a gimmick boot.
Wait, hold on. Was it for one boot or for the set? For both?
No, he only had the one boot.
Oh, he only had the one.
He only had the one boot. So it's $5,100 for one boot, but it wasn't the boot camp match boot. They went back at the end of the show and watched the film, and he was in a battle royal in this boot, but it wasn't the boot camp match boot because the colors were flipped around. So fucking A, Pantazzi. You fucking got $5,100 out of him and sold him a gimmick boot. I love that. But otherwise, I mean,
how about Slaughter's collection? How about the fact that he has everything that he ever did?
Yes, and he had his swagger stick. And one of these days, the guys that want to sell some of their stuff, a lot of these treasures are going to open up, including me when I die 30 or 40 years from now. But the only thing that bugged me about this show was now Stephanie has to say these characters when referring to people, and now Sarge is saying the word character too because he's been around them so long. But otherwise than that, I enjoyed this just because it was older stuff than what they've been looking for. I don't know. Did anything stand out to you?
I enjoyed it. I mean, it's fun. It's obviously set up in a lot of ways. They're looking for the boots. They're looking for his whip. They're looking for his hat. But I enjoyed it. It's a silly little show. Whatever museum they're going to set up will be interesting. And it really makes Triple H seem like a nice guy.
And that's the most important part.
And Stephanie's creepy as hell when the show opens up. She's like, whatever she says, have you heard of this guy? Or whatever it is. Yeah. And they go, and then you can tell Triple H just want to be there. How about him? And they go to the next thing. But she, I don't know, very creepy.
She's always spoken well of you.
Oh. It's because I have a big cock.
Where the fuck did that come from? What the... All righty then. That wasn't even an edit. That was just a dramatic drum beat.